Coelius. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, which is funny because we've been talking for about 10 minutes already. So, it's just pretending like we just started a conversation.
I mean, that's how podcasts rock, right? You like
Exactly.
all the busy talk happens ahead of time.
Exactly. So I'm going to put us side by side for the view. Thanks for joining me today and having us have the opportunity to do a little conversation. Why don't you start first by just kind of explaining to everybody, what it is that you're up to?
Cool. Yeah. So I'm gosh, I'm gonna date myself and start to get old. Almost 20-year veteran of ad tech, martech. Stumbled into this space when I started my first company, Trigit, in 2005. Which is, yeah, it's almost been 20 years, but
Hmm.
really focused on and really kind of got into this world of how does an advertiser use data to help tell their stories and to help have a relationship with their consumer and their customer and grow their businesses and grow their brands. And
Yep.
so I have a small MarTech shop today that helps companies do that um, at scale and really think about, how can you combine this idea of storytelling and brand and creative with really rigorous quantitative methodologies that let you really measure the success of those things.
Yeah. And you're touching on, we talk pretty often, and you're touching on a lot of the topics that are hot topics for marketers, but also these are topics that they've been talking about for a while. So as you've been talking to them just the last year, so let's look at just like 2023, um, what are the common themes? What are the common challenges that they're bubbling up to you that you're seeing that maybe are more recent, more relevant, more, in time for today?
Yeah, I mean, I think quantitative marketing or this idea that numbers can help you tell a story has always been hard. It's
Mhm.
always been complicated. But the big players in the space and, sort of if you combine the big players such as Apple, coupled with sort of the realities of privacy laws, et cetera, are making it harder. And so quantitative marketing and this idea that, you can measure the success of your marketing efforts relies on data piping and data flows and et cetera. And that's become a lot harder in the last few years, especially with kind of the introduction of iOS 14.5. Most people who major in marketing because they want to be storytellers. They want to be, they want to help really think about creativity and how they can help grow.
Yeah.
They're not math majors, right? They didn't go study STEM in school. And yet today, marketing is really so reliant on that sort of quantitative foundation, that math, right? And engineering foundation. And so I think one of the other things that I see on a regular basis is organizations don't seem to see this disconnect, right? They don't seem to see that it's gotten a lot harder, it's gotten a lot more complicated, and that a lot of the leaders, don't necessarily have a deep, rich history in math and engineering, which is where they
Mhm.
need to be today. And so often organizations really aren't supporting their teams the way they need to. And, marketing becomes kind of like the ugly duckling that nobody wants to deal with. But yet it's paramount. It's like more important than ever that marketers, especially, marketing leaders, have that support with analysts, with dedicated data scientists, with engineering and instrumentation support, so that they can really both be these great storytellers who have a keen quantitative understanding of what's going on, who's making sure they're pushing and piping and doing everything up to the best practices and best standards, which are just getting more and more and more complicated for all of the reasons. And then there's just the competition, right? Which is that as more and more people figure out how to do it, it's more important that your organization is effectively doing it right, or you're going to get left behind. And so,
Mhm.
I think it's gotten harder. And I don't yet see this organizational catch up where, leaders are getting the support and the funding they need to build the teams to really be able to do to be best in class.
Yeah. And you do focus on the teams and the technology that they have at play for themselves. So how do you go about talking to those marketers? Because they spend a lot of time, they spend a lot of money investing in the tech stacks that they are currently working with. They've probably put a lot of money and training into the teams that they have. You can't just walk in and say, hey, you've got the wrong team or you've got the wrong stack. You doing so is basically going to turn anybody off. No one's going to want to invite you in the front door. So how are you helping them to understand where the changes can be made, where the optimizations can happen? And also, like, how do they just get the most out of the investment they've already made?
I mean, I think that like the one of the most important things to remember is that like it's not different than a car, right? With a car, it used to be that you could change your own oil, right? And like change your air filter and, prop the hood in your driveway and do a pretty good job of maintaining your car.
Hmm.
I mean, if you tried to open up the hood of a Tesla today, like you better be a specialist. Like you better know what you're doing. And so I think the expectation that every marketer is supposed to be this specialist that can do everything, that can work on these really sophisticated platforms is the wrong expectation. So I
Hmm.
think it's really important to say, okay, how do we support our team in making sure that they have the resources that they need, that they have access to the specialists they need, that they have access to the tools they need to deliver the best marketing organization that we can, right? That they can literally be the best that they can. And
Hmm.
it isn't by expecting them to do everything themselves or be experts. It's how do you support, how do you guide, how do you accelerate, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's, the same is true of a tech stack. Like, it's interesting. People, as you invest in a tech stack, I do think that there are some moments in time when you invest in an overpriced tech stack or a legacy stack, or you've made decisions where the stack is just outdated or broken or expensive, where you really should stop and say, like, is there a better way?
Hmm.
But so often, if you can do the brilliant basics well, it doesn't really matter like what your stack is, right? So if you make sure that like everything is structured well, it's clean, you reduce your martech debt, right? Everyone talks about engineering debt. Well, the accumulation of marketing debt happens too, right? Someone placed a
Sure.
pixel there 15 years ago and it's the same event that's being captured and it's never been changed, even though all these other changes have made place. So if you can just say, let's have the brilliant basics right, let's make sure that our car is just driving as smoothly as possible and it's nice and clean, then you might not need the fanciest, most newfangled thing that's out there. And actually, the switching costs of switching, right, could end up just causing like catastrophic failures and other types of results. It's so
Yeah.
interesting. One of the questions I often get is like, I think I want a new ad agency. I just had two meetings like this very recently. I think I want a new
Right.
ad agency.
You hear
And
that
it's
all the
like,
time.
right, but you're like, well, are they doing it right? And are they doing it efficiently? Because if they are doing it right and they are doing it efficiently, then a new agency isn't going to be able to get more out of your customers or the platform or any of these other things, right? And the
Hmm.
switching cost from a new agency can be very, very high. And the same is totally true of like the platforms and the tech stacks that have been invested in and contracted in and integrated and instrumented in, is that if the brilliant basics are being done well, like yeah, maybe the newfangled thing could get you a little bit of like incremental growth, but the
Right.
reality is that like it's probably not going to be that much more. And so it's really about making sure that you're using what you have to the best of its ability, right? That
Hmm.
you're using what you have, like really maximizing the potential of that. And if you're still not able to achieve, like if you're built on an old legacy ecom, bespoke, like custom ecom
Sure.
platform that keeps breaking, like Shopify is doing pretty good these days and it makes it pretty simple. But I think it's hard to blame the stack or blame the team or blame the agency, right? Without first saying, are we doing the brilliant basics really well?
And the basics is the data. You said this before when we were talking. It's the data that's inside the engine.
It's how you collect. So the first thing is you have to collect the data. We just did a big cleanup for a client where we went in and did an analysis, did an audit, and they had hundreds of event data that had been accumulated over the past, call it like 10 years, hundreds,
Hmm.
and they needed three. They needed
Okay.
three events that actually mattered. And so it was identifying those events, understanding those events, and making sure that they were instrumented correctly so that we could capture the data to have a better understanding of their customer and consumer, and then make decisions on the platforms accordingly. And so the first is to make sure you're collecting the right data, not too much, not too little, that you're
Hmm.
collecting the right data, that you're organizing it with consistency and continuity, right? So that like one apple is compared to another apple versus suddenly like you have a 30-day view attribution window over here and a 1-day click attribution window over there, and you're trying to come up with your media model. So making sure that you're organizing it with consistency and continuity so that then you can look at the data and understand how to deploy your capital and your resources and your time, et cetera. Because
Hmm.
you have the right data, your data's all equal. So it's generally like all the same. So you can look at it and judge it accordingly. And then it becomes pretty easy to understand how to make decisions against that data and with that
Yeah.
data.
But
The
like a
other
lot of
really
this,
important piece is that like that data is how these platforms operate today, right?
yeah.
So if you're giving the wrong signal to not only yourself and how you're buying media, but to any ad platform and how they're buying media on your behalf, it just falls down, right? And so it's so
Yeah.
important to have just clean pipes, clean pipes, clean pipes. And again, it doesn't have to be sophisticated. It can be simple as long as it's clean.
Sorry. It's just you just described my colonoscopy a couple of years ago.
I mean, if the
Everything works
pipes
better
are
because it's
clean,
clean.
then yeah,
Pipes are clean.
the
But
crap
it's
doesn't
funny.
gunk it up.
So this is a maintenance conversation more than rip and replace. And you're basically helping people figure out how to make better use of the tools that they have, right?
I mean, we work with relatively large advertisers, right? We work
Yeah.
with advertisers that are spending, call it $10 million plus a year on their marketing. I do think it gets a lot more complicated if you're spending like $100 million on your marketing, but call it, anywhere in between. So if you're spending a lot of money, like you've got an infrastructure already in place that's doing something.
Yeah.
And I think, it's so interesting. The marketing and really the acquisition teams, right, are really, I think, a very undervalued team within organizations. Here's the team that's really driving new customer acquisition, who's really driving an incredible amount of revenue. And it's often being managed by a relatively junior person or being delegated to someone who's more junior. I mean, these really should be some of the highest paid people within an organization that are driving millions or tens of millions of dollars in revenue out of these platforms. And they're often like very young people who just graduated from school. And so I think paying attention to the fact that that muscle is just fundamental. Again, you don't have to do a lot of really sophisticated things, especially not in today's day and age. As you get bigger, I think the sophistication increases. But I think at the range where you're spending 10, 20, even 30, $40 million a year on your media, you can actually get away with just being really rigorous on your fundamentals.
Okay.
And I think once you've got, if you're up to that size, the sophistication of the stack that you've built, invested in, and instrumented is sophisticated. It has to be in order to let you get there.
Yeah.
And ripping it out, right? Even though Salesforce would love to have you rip it out, is it like, are you going to get more out of ripping it out, or are you going to get more by focusing on incremental growth? Because the time commitment is going to be the same. So you can either rip it out and be in the same place or even go backwards, or you can deploy brilliant basics, say, hey, what we have is going to work well enough, right? Let's figure out how to make sure that we've instrumented it really well, and then execute against those basics. And then I do think there's moments where you hit walls where maybe the conversation changes, but you got to get pretty big to get there.
Yeah. Okay. But for a marketer they're engaging with you, they're engaging with other people, like they have a great team even on their own, and they don't need to engage, but they have already spent time trying to figure out how to make sure the data that's coming in is clean, that it's the pipes are clean, that it can flow from one source to the next placement, etc. They've got all that taken care of. What do you think is probably or should be at the top of their list of concerns going forward? What should they be scared of?
I mean, I think that the realities of martech debt and what happens as you add in features and add in things happens and can degrade and can break your marketing stack a lot more quickly than you think. In today's age of how platforms operate, and I would classify this with every major platform, if we think about largely focusing on the world of acquisition, but acquisition including things like organic and SEO, et cetera. These platforms, and like, you get very sophisticated as you start to layer on more and more and more things. And it's just really, really easy to break them. So even when you feel like everything's going really smoothly today, it's really easy for something to break and all of a sudden be like, what just happened? Why isn't this working anymore? And it's really easy for decisions to be made, and potentially decisions to be made with people that aren't as sophisticated in their understanding. And I'll give you a really good example of this. Decisions to be made that aren't as sophisticated in their understanding of what you're doing as a marketer, right? That can break things. So we had a client, a very large brand, who had a lawyer that got involved and decided that the entire brand should follow, including in the US, should follow the data and privacy laws of the most stringent and strict places in Europe, and do it in the most strict way possible. No one else is operating with the strictness that the law says that you could or should be operating to. But they were like, we're just going to do it once, and we're going to do it the most sophisticated, the most strict that we can, because that way everything is covered, which is true, right? Yeah, which is true. And in applying those privacy constraints, they broke the event tracking and event pixelization on their website. And all of a sudden, that decision made by a lawyer who's not a marketer fundamentally broke the marketing program. And 6 months later, they were like, what happened? We're like, well, you're not passing data into any major platform. They don't know, they don't have any information. And so I think it's
right. But that's the big concern. It took them 6 months to figure that out, right?
6 months, because it degrades slowly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we saw pretty quickly what was happening, but it took 6 months before the CEO was like, what just happened? And now they just lost 6 months of data. So even if they were to instrument a change the next day, it's still going to take 6 to 8 months to gather that momentum that we had back again.
Mhm.
And that was, like I said, a decision that was not escalated to this, to the executive team by a lawyer, that just fundamentally broke the marketing efforts that was going profoundly well. And
Yeah.
everyone's like, what happened? And it was like, it's easy to break.
Yeah.
And I think that's there, these things that we've built and architected, they're so fragile. And so you really want to be checking them constantly to make sure, you want to be monitoring them constantly so that that we had the best analysis. We do a lot of auditing. The best audit that we ever did against a brand that got really high scores. And they were doing it right. Everything was structured well. They were really efficient in how they were deploying capital. But we still found multiple instances of broken piping between Klaviyo, their ESP, and Facebook, Meta, and how they were piping the data into Google, right? They just broke. And it took an engineer 5 minutes to fix it, but he wasn't aware that it was broken. And if you start to
Right.
compound how many little pieces can break. And so I think monitoring, maintenance, really making sure that that you've got, it's why you take your car into get the oil changed, right? It's an opportunity to run those diagnostics and make sure that everything looks good. And so I think the more that these machines become dependent on piping and data flows and automation and AI, the more important it is to make sure that it's like solid, it's in
And
a good
that's
place.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? When you and I have talked about this concept, is you're making sure that they are ready to be able to take advantage of the tools. Because even what you just said, in theory, AI should enable the platform to be able to raise an alert when something is breaking and the data is not flowing. But it's not there yet, and it can't possibly be there yet until you help them to get ready to be able to take advantage of it.
It's not only not there yet, but it's going to be a while. Like no major platform, right, is excited about AI suddenly like taking over and making decisions on behalf of marketers that they've spent decades building relationships with, like Google,
Right.
Meta, like Microsoft. Like they're not stoked to like remove the human, right? They like their marketers and the teams of people that they've built and invested a lot into these relationships.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that those platforms are going to make it simple to just suddenly like automate us all out of jobs, right? I think that like they're invested to make sure that it's they're trying to maximize how many dollars you're putting into their platform,
Mhm.
not how to maximize your entire spend and your entire stack. So
Yeah.
I think there's going to just continue to be so much human involved for a while to come, if for no other reason than these big big players are going to make sure that it's not that's true.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you heard it here first, so our jobs are safe, but
well,
you do need to
I
be
think
ready.
I think like the realities of productivity and automation and how we're going to be able to grow and scale and get better at decisioning, like all of that is coming, right?
Mhm.
There will probably be our jobs will become different, right? And hopefully a lot of the quantitative components that we're talking about here will become a lot more simple, because I
Yeah.
think today they're still way too hard. 80% of the companies that we work with, maybe even 90, are not as sophisticated in their data analytics and quantitative sort of analysis as they'd like to be. Like it's
Mhm.
just hard, right? Or they have some wizard, but the whole team struggles, and their content person's like, how do I decision on what I should be producing, and how do I use data to help decision on what's the dashboard look like? So I think this problem is just it's hard, and it's going to continue to be hard for time to come.
Yeah. All right. Well, Susan, this is a very fun conversation. I think we'll probably end up doing another one, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific problems that these marketers are having and how you help them to solve it, just in general, because I think more marketers probably need to hear about it and know about it in advance. But I do appreciate the time. So thank you very much for taking it.
Oh, always excited to talk about the depths of martech.